So tonight's session is on sacrifice, on the ethics of sacrifice. And they come at it in many different ways. And when we look at the text, that the idea is how much or what does an individual have to sacrifice for the good of society or for the good of someone else? And, we touched on it a little bit when we talked about, if you remember way back when, there was a session on universal ethics, right? What do we owe to the whole world? And then our own people. What do we owe to our own people? And how does Judaism balance that in a in a world where there's only limited resources? And so this will begin to it overlaps. It overlaps with, to a certain extent, but then also talks about sort of an individual's responsibility toward themselves. So with that, we will look at the first source. So starts with a verse from Torah, from the book of Leviticus. You shall not go as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Lord. So the question is, first of all, don't be a talebearer, don't be a gossip. There's a lot of stuff like that. You could do a whole session on the ethics of gossip, which is, we're not supposed to do it. But not standing idly by the blood of your neighbor could mean a couple of things. So what could it mean? I mean, it's not, maybe it's obvious or maybe it's not, but if you look at don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor, perhaps what might that mean?
Yeah. That if you see something happening, you see your neighbor maybe being murdered or attacked or something, that you shouldn't just stand there. You shouldn't just be a bystander.
So you can't be a bystander. It's hard to read this in light of what happened in Texas today, because I feel that politically, we're all bystanders. Like, how much can you scream and yell and something should happen? And, we need more help for the mentally ill, and we need more gun control laws, and we need this and we need that. It's like, it's like shouting into the wind. Judy, you were coming from a different direction, so you probably didn't see this, but we were in Virginia this weekend for a lovely wedding. And we were in just a little small town in rural Virginia. And when we were driving to the wedding venue, there was a sign, free guns every Sunday until noon. And the presumption is if you give away a gun, nobody's buying it, so they don't need a background check. And I felt like, this is what we're up against, right? Now, this is a small town in Virginia. Maybe they know everybody that's coming to get the guns. I don't know. But I feel like, I don't know, I can talk, I'll write more postcards, blah, blah, blah. Well, but I feel like very much we're all plunged into this place where we're all standing idly by, because there's not really anything that we can do. I don't know how, just lighten it up a bit, but I don't know, because I don't know if everybody is aware that some of you probably are, that there's really a terrible crisis with baby formula in this country, and having a grandchild that needs to have some formula supplementing his feeding. It's frightening. And I saw a cartoon last week, and it had a guy coming in from the grocery store, and he said to his wife, I can't find any baby formula, but I picked up a couple of AR-15s. I know I'm getting us way off a field and not standing idly by, but Ron, I'll let you say something, but you have to unmute. Wait, you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You are, of course, right in the middle of that, if someone talks to you and gives to you a confidence that might endanger someone else, you're kind of in the middle
Rabbis are
of being
mandated,
a tale.
clergy are mandated reporters, just like
Right.
social workers and other people. So if I were to hear somebody, abuse somebody or that, no, we're mandated reporters. So if somebody came to me and said, I'm thinking of hurting somebody, I'm a mandated reporter. There are certain things that you
Well, what if he told you that he had hurt somebody?
mandated report, I call the police. Like that's
But do you not have the duty of confidentiality like a
not when
priest?
it comes to putting somebody else in harm.
Okay,
Because the Torah says don't stand idly by, right? There are certain, actually you could really attribute it back to the verse that we're studying, which is, you cannot stand by if somebody, if somebody is harming somebody, if somebody is going to harm somebody. It's interesting, the concept of being a rabbi and being a pastoral presence is pretty late in our tradition. So there is no law around rabbinic confidentiality that would, I hate to use this word, trump somebody else coming to harm. Jerry?
One doesn't have to follow the Talmud to know what is the right thing to do. So all this is, I think, pretty much irrelevant. Standing by is what got us to where we are today. And there are a lot of people, as you well know, after talking with members of the congregation, there's a lot of depression that set in, that people feel at this point there's little hope that this country can be what it once was, unfortunately.
Yeah. By the way, Ron, it's different because we're an attorney by training. Like you're an attorney, and is that correct? Do I remember that correct?
No, not me.
No, Ron.
Ron is.
A lawyer's in a different position, right? There are, an attorney's in a different position, and I don't, but a clergy member, no. All right, so let's look at, we were all.
there's a story about a lawyer who knew the perpetrator of a murder, and he knew that the man in prison for that murder was not guilty, and he could not go to the authorities to extricate the innocent man in prison by implicating a former client who he knew was in fact guilty of the crime.
Right. So
Until finally this former client died, and then he was freed to disclose and extricate the innocent man from prison.
Wow. All right, that's a pretty, all right, we're gonna go on. And then Paul, I see your hand is up. So let's just go on and look at another source, and then I'll call on you.
All right.
Okay. So you cannot stand idly by. And so this is the Rambam, this is Maimonides. So this source is about 1,000 years old. Whenever a person can save another's life, but he fails to do so, he transgresses a negative commandment. As Leviticus 19:16 states, do not stand idly by while your brother's blood is at stake. Similarly, this commandment applies when a person sees a colleague drowning at sea or being attacked by robbers or a wild animal, and he can save himself or he can hire others to save him, transgresses the commandment, do not stand idly by while your brother's blood is at stake. So we're going to look at this. This is a little bit more complicated, but you can't just, we talked about this because I think we had another source that sort of referred to this when I get confused whether I talked about that with this class or the Tuesday morning class, but was it Kitty Genovese? What was the horrible case in New York?
Yep.
Such a long
was it.
time ago, right? Where a woman was screaming, help, help, and nobody did anything. That's a violation of Jewish law. You're not allowed to say, I didn't, you know, if I didn't see it, or I don't want to get involved, or you must. If you have an ability to save somebody, you must save them. If you have an ability to hire somebody to save somebody, you can't just turn, oh, listen, we've talked quite a bit about your enemy's animal needing to be returned, right? How much the more so that if there's a human life at stake, you must act. Paul, you had your hand up before?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I can't speak for a lawyer. But I am a social worker. There are things that you do keep you absolutely keep confidential, but there are certain things that cross the line. And those are the things, if you're going to harm yourself or you're going to harm others, then you have to, as you had indicated, as a mandated reporter, have to contact the authorities.
You know, I had a congregant once who had a nephew that was talking about suicide. And he called her and he told her like he just couldn't take it anymore and that he was going to end his life. And she called me and she said, I'm not really sure what to do. He's home alone. He just told me this. Like, what do you think I should do? And I said, I think you should call the police. And she said, but you know, if this is his right, if this is what he wants, like, I don't know whether I should get involved. And I said to her, I think you should call the police. I think you should get off the phone with me and you should call the police. Anyways, ... The police came. He was taken to the hospital. He survived and he did not, whatever therapy or whatever he got, he did not try again. And as far as I know, this was maybe 20 years ago. As far as I know, he is alive. And, you know, it's an, you know, like on one hand, she in her way wanted to honor his wishes. But it, you know, this would, I mean, that would be a pretty dramatic example of you don't stand idly by. Like
Yeah.
if somebody is a danger to themselves or somebody else, you have to act according to Jewish law.
I was just going to add that what she needed to do, in which you encouraged her or you did or whatever, is to contact the authorities so that there is an assessment of whether or not it's really serious.
Right.
I mean, I once saw an older adult in their apartment who said, there are times that I feel as if I'd like to jump out the window and kill myself. And then I said to her, have you ever tried? And she said, yes. So when she said yes, and then we moved ahead
Right.
and linked her up with immediate counseling. But I mean, you did the right thing by at least getting some professional to conduct an assessment.
But the real challenge, I think about this a lot because I've also dealt as a rabbi with teen suicide, drug use, whatever it is, and how often their friends know what's happening. And, you know, they don't want to be a tattletale but whatever it is. And the question of how, and I also feel bad because I feel like our teens shouldn't have to be on the front lines of other people's mental health crisis. We're asking an awful lot of our teens to be the ones that are making these, you know, decisions. But one of the things that we talk to teens a lot, like call somebody, call a teacher, call the parents, tell the school social worker, you know, tell somebody so that somebody else can step in. So these are actually, you know, Jewish values, and they're not, you know, we talked about last week, we talked about rebuking. So it's like, that's, you know, how you do it. Do you do it? Or, you know, or maybe you'll never see your enemy's animal, you know, will never wander into your yard. But a law like this is applicable in so many different ways. And it's really hard, you know, how we teach young people and older people how, you know, not to be bystanders, because there is a culture of, you know, teens, you know, circling the wagons. Diane. Wait, you're still muted.
Now, so I don't know if this is relevant, but growing up in West Michigan, my dad had stores, and one of the stores was a sporting goods store. And I can't speak for my sister, but I was never allowed to go behind the counter area where the guns were. That's just not something I was allowed to do. But what I did do, and my dad made me faithfully do it, was he had a log that he would keep internally in the store with the person's name to see how much ammunition was being purchased by someone. It wasn't a state law. It wasn't even a local law. And I don't know what he did with that information, but he looked at that log a lot. And I think that those times, because I'm almost 70 now, those times were very different, and it was very personal. You weren't part of a chain store. It was an independent store. You knew the people who came in, and it was a very personal. The sale of guns was extremely personal, and the sale of ammunition was traceable. It wasn't an anonymous. You go into a large cavernous convention-sized room, and you deal with someone that you never see again. And I look at these stories, and I think it was so different then. I knew exactly how many 22 long bullets were purchased by a family at the end of every month. It's a very different way to do things. I'm not sure how many people did that then, but my dad did it.
Yeah.
He knew, he wanted to know.
Barbara and then Ron.
Rather than stand idly by, are you obligated to put yourself at risk? Going back to the Kitty Genovese example, I mean, any one of those people in their apartments hearing her scream could have called the police, but were they obligated to run down and try to protect her from her assailant?
So we're going to look at a source that I think is going to probably surprise us, but I think in Judaism, the answer is no, right? Like, that's why you could call somebody, you could hire, like Rambam says, you could hire somebody. They didn't have a police force, so I don't know, the idea that you could, just pick up the phone and call, or was, I mean, there must have been some sort of a policing something, but it wasn't like, as we know, modern policing today. But no, and we're going to talk about that. You'd never have to sacrifice
yourself at
your
risk.
own life, unless there's only two reasons that you, like, if the Torah, the Talmud actually talks about this. If it's somebody says, if you don't kill that person, I'm going to kill you, you have to allow yourself to be killed. You cannot take somebody else's life to save your life, but your life takes precedence over saving somebody else's life. So you don't have to sacrifice you don't have to run down into the middle of somebody being murdered and to try to like pull the arm of the murderer off the person if you think that you're going to be killed. But of course, we live in a society where one could, call for help. Ron.
But yeah, I agree. You don't have to jeopardize your own life. I'm thinking now how many times I've heard Elie Wiesel mouth the very same things about not staying quiet. But I want to finish the scenario that I began. This lawyer who knew the real killer had an opportunity, if he wished, to disclose that. It would have cost him his license. He could not have continued practicing law. The state would have, on the complaint of the guilty guy, would have had to take away his license. It's a clear violation of the legal ethics. I can't quote the exact statute at this time, but I know that was creating the conflict. And that's what I think is a problem, is solving the conflicts. And the idea that you see something and we call the police to help somebody, I don't think that creates a serious ethics conflict.
Right, right.
But what this lawyer had is, I don't know how many years he sat back and decided whether or not he would give up his life, his work, in order to free the guy who was in jail improperly. Or
And I have to tell you, I think Jewish law would have come down differently on this than American law. I think Jewish law would say you cannot stand idly by and watch somebody be imprisoned when you know that they're innocent. And if it means that you lose your livelihood, then you'll deliver
be it.
pizza. You know, you would, if it would be you, if you tell you would die, like somehow you know, you don't have to sacrifice your life. But I think Judaism, I mean, Jewish law and American law are not the same, right? They're not the same. There are certain similarities in certain cases, but I actually think that Jewish law would say that he would have had to free this innocent person, even at the risk of his own livelihood.
can you imagine the stress that this guy went through
Too
Yeah,
bad.
it's
with this
horrible.
for years after year? And it was several decades before this fellow died, freeing up this attorney's ability to disclose the true facts.
Right. Paul, and then let's look at another source.
Now, I just wanted to comment that sometimes the law is not necessarily a good law. And where I'm going with that is I think that this is true story that in World War II, and that there were boatloads of Jews being hidden in the bowels of a ship going up to, I think, Sweden or whatever. And the law was you're going to report you've got Jews, so you would be at risk. But the captains of those boats said, no, this is a bad law, and we're going to transport these Jewish individuals who are at risk.
Right, but it's sometimes you break the law for a different sense of more.
Ooh, that's right.
The hot dog, right? Like I answer to a higher authority, the kosher hot dog commercial from
Right.
my youth. We answer to a higher authority. So now we're going to do something which is actually not about life and death. I think that's the next source. So not standing idly by can be about a person's life. But the question that this text asks, and again, I think they went from something so dramatic to something interesting, but this is about resources, about what do you owe people? You know, this isn't about universal versus the individual. This is about what type of support, what type of financial support do you owe people, right? In the ideal world, if people were poor, there would be so many resources that, you know, they would be able to receive enough tzedakah. And I'm sorry, my phone is ringing and it's not my cell, so I can't just mute it. But the other question that this is going to ask about, what if you were a person that had been a person of means and then became poor? What does the community, what would a respectful community owe you? And, you know, think about if it was you and not if it was somebody else. So the rabbis say that we are supposed to take care of people sufficient for their needs. And this implies that you're commanded to maintain them, but you're not commanded to make them rich. Now that would seem obvious, right? You have a community of people. Listen, you know, we've seen this even in the Jewish community after 2008, after other times when there's been a real economic fallout in our community, that you have people, even people that live on the North Shore, maybe are living in a big house and look like they're still people of means, but they're not anymore, right? And especially in 2008, when you couldn't even sell your house, right? So the only asset you might have, you couldn't sell. It might be mortgaged to the hilt. And you need help, right? You need help. What are our responsibility to helping people? So the first suggests what they need. right? So then there becomes a question is, how do you interpret what they need? Like, do they need, I don't know, 2,000 calories a day, right? That's what they need, whatever that is. They need 2,000 calories a day, basic, just some basic food, and a roof over their head. And you can take
Clothing.
your whole family and, stick them in 2 rooms. And that's what you can do, because after all, behind that person that has needs is a long line of other people that have need. You only have so much that you can give. And so you have to, meet it out. Everybody gets the same. So that would be one way to look at it, and probably a reasonable way to look at it. But our tradition it suggests that there may be a different way to look at it. So sufficient for their needs, that which they lack. That's the whole verse. And so they say, well, what they lack means more than just what they need. So it could include a horse to ride upon, a slave to run before them. It was related about Hillel the elder that he bought for a certain poor man who was of good family a horse to ride upon and a slave to run before him. On one occasion, he could not find a slave to run before him. So he himself, the great Rabbi Hillel, ran 3 miles in front of this horse, like led this horse. A certain man once applied to Rabbi Nehemiah for sustenance, and he asked him, what do your meals consist of? The rabbi asked him, of fat meat and aged wine, he replied. Will you consent to live with me on lentils? He consented, lived with him on lentils, and died. Alas for this man whom Nehemiah has killed. On the contrary, alas for Nehemiah who killed this man. The fact, however, is the man himself was to blame, for he should have not cultivated his luxurious habits to such an extent. So you can see there's sort of a debate here, and it leaves it really so some rabbis suggest that you should try to support people according to their standard of living. So if they had a horse, you should give them a horse. If they were accustomed to having, people take care of them, a cleaning service, whatever it would be, in our day and age, you should try to support them in the way in which they were accustomed. And then we have the Rabbinic Judaism likes to say there's a story. They presume that it really happened. Whether it really happened or not, who knows? But there was a rabbi who provided this rich man who had only eaten meat and wine and only gave him lentils, and the man died. So one source says, well, it's Rabbi Nehemiah's fault because he killed this poor man by giving him an inadequate diet. But it ends saying, no, this man should have, learned how to live, according to his means.
Eat the wrong foods.
His new. Now it's interesting. I don't know if you remember, it was a long time ago now, when there was a terrible financial crisis in Argentina, and the Argentinian Jews were it was in a very bad situation. And many of them decided to make Aliyah. And when you make Aliyah, you get there's certain rights. The Israeli government gives you certain rights, and those rights consist on like benefits, like you get to buy certain things tax-free, you get to bring certain things into the country tax-free. But the Argentinian Jews had no money, right? People would bring lifts when they make Aliyah. If you were from a community of means, you'd bring your lift and you'd bring your, your furniture, your washer, your dryer, your car, whatever it was you could bring, because you could get it into the country tax-free in this window of like 2 years while you had these special rights as a new immigrant. So, but the Jews from Argentina had no money with which to bring a lift, and the Israeli government made an interesting decision. It would have been cheaper to say, come with nothing, and we'll give you a stipend to purchase what you need when you get here. The Israeli government, which isn't always known for its most kindness, it's a bureaucracy, it's not, but in this situation, in this Aliyah, they actually paid the extra money to let the Argentinian Jews bring their lift from home so that they could come with their things. And the sense was that they would be happier, that they'd be easier, it would be easier on them, it would be kinder and more compassionate. They'd already lost so much, not to make them leave their things behind as well, even though it was more expensive for the government to ship all of these things. And I thought, that's sort of an interesting application of what we just talked about, right? Like, you didn't have to do it. The tradition doesn't say that you have to do it, but sometimes you want to, like, I just saw this, even with our, the Afghan family that we sponsored. Nobody said, like, here, take my used, like, people went out of their way, right, to bring nicer things, to buy new things, to only donate things if they were in very good condition. Like, nobody wanted to say to this family, well, you have nothing, so we can just give you, the minimum. I wasn't there the day that they moved in, but I was told that the refrigerator and the cupboards were bursting with the things that people donated. And, you can't always do that, right? If we had 100 families that we had to help resettle, we would have had to make different choices about what we provided them. We only had one family that we had to worry about, and we have an affluent, community that could help. But what this source is trying to say is that there are times when you might want to go the extra mile. You might want to help somebody live a life of a certain kind of dignity, because you're not just, there's actually a prayer in it's actually in the Siddur. I think it's one of the Mishaberachs that talks about, may I never become poor and have to rely on the community because their gifts are meager. It would be an embarrassment, and it would be uncomfortable, and people aren't always, either they can't be as generous as they like to be, or they're not as generous as they'd like to be. Ben and Eileen, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks. First of all, my mom's dad was a guy who never had two nickels to rub together. But the blessing that he gave each of us was that we should always be in a position to give tzedakah and never be in a position where we needed it.
Right. So.
And the second thing is, I don't know if this was generally known or not, but during Ramadan, the community provided meals to the Afghan family so that they would be able to celebrate their holiday in the way that is meant to be celebrated.
Yeah, I love that. We did a meal train, and we're actually doing a second one, even though Ramadan is ending, because people really responded. Well, first of all, this poor woman, the mother, has barely gotten out of the apartment. She's got 4 children and a husband who's has lost a leg, is on crutches, and she cooked every day. And when Elise asked her, like, what, would it be helpful to you if some people brought you meals, she was very excited. She was really happy and very excited. And our community, was fantastic. People signed up. I actually, when I saw the sign up sheet, I said to Elise, you're asking people, most of whom live in the suburbs, to drive into the city to drop off food at 5 o'clock. Who is going to sign up for that? But everybody did. So we're doing it again, or Elise is helping arrange it again. So another email, I think, just went out. But yes, it was a lovely thing, and people, I'm sure, did lovely meals and were very generous. And so our tradition talks about that, right? Like, you don't just say to somebody, oh, I'm going to bring you a meal. Here's a bowl of lentils, and you should be happy for that, right? Like, you want to treat people in a way that you yourself would want to be treated. So, but that takes a certain amount of sacrifice, right? Whether it's your individual sacrifice or the community's sacrifice, to provide in that way, people have to be, well, that's why this is, I assume, under the umbrella of the ethics of sacrifice. Diane.
So is it also fair to say, if you live on lentils, it is not expected to keep someone in fine wine and silk and steak, because
Correct.
if the community depletes itself to continue a fantasy for someone else, then which is, I think, what the rabbi was saying, it was that man's fault for not understanding how to survive on lentils. It's a two-way street.
Right. You know, it's interesting. This doesn't have to do with food, but in our tradition, in the Torah, it says you're supposed to leave the corners of your field for the poor people to come and glean at the end of the harvest, and anything that you drop or anything that you forget. So there's a lot in our tradition about what is a corner and how much do you leave, and what's the, not every field is shaped like a square. And there's just a lot about what your obligations are to the poor. But there's also a whole chapter on advice to the gleaners. Don't trample anybody's fence. Don't pick from areas where you're not permitted. Because the thing is the ideal is it has to be a two-way street. And even though the Torah says and the Talmud says you have to allow people to glean, if year after year people come in and trample your field and don't do what they're supposed to do, the field owner is going to say, I don't care if it's a violation of the Torah. I can't do this anymore. Right. So there has to be a balance. And this text suggests between the giver and the recipient. Right. The giver can't be overly greedy. I mean, the giver is supposed to give as generously as they can, but sometimes the recipient might need to tone down their expectations too, because the community doesn't have unlimited funds to just, to give wherever. But this is really has nothing to do with Jewish text. But I somebody told me, I had no idea. So I went to the University of Michigan, and I was talking to congregants recently, and they said, there's a significant percentage of University of Michigan students that have food insecurity, and so University of Michigan, I'm sure they're not the only ones, opened up a food pantry, kind of like the Ark, where you sign up for it in advance, and then you can just go in like it's a grocery store and take food off the shelves like a grocery store and bring it home. And I mean, it really struck me like what it would be, but to be a poor, there's sort of this stereotype of the poor starving student, of old, but there might be a poor starving student of current. But again, and the Ark does this in other places, to make it look like a grocery store, to make it look like you're coming in and shopping. Nobody's handing you a bag. Here's your box with your lentils and your rice and your, whatever. But to have it be a place where you have choice, and you can go in and you can choose what you like, and it looks, I don't know what it looks like. I hope it looks nice enough. So how do you create a way to make it look, dignified? So now we're going to look at a text that has no connection with that. And in a way, it's connected with standing idly by. See, that's what I said about doing somebody else's curriculum. I don't know that I would have inserted that one in here. But this is a question, and it may or may not surprise you, but the question of how much, I think this ties into the question of, do you have to, if there's like a murder being committed, do you have to run in and try to stop it, right? Do you have to sacrifice your own life to try to save somebody else? And what does that mean? So if two are traveling on a journey far from civilization, and one has a pitcher of water, now, here's the question, right? Like, obviously, if you have a pitcher of water and there's enough for both of you, you cannot stand idly by. You'd have to share your water. Like, that's fairly obvious in the text that we already read, that you can't, that you have to share. If there's enough, you must share with the other person. But what if there isn't, right? You have your, I don't know, your canteen of water, and there's not enough for both of you. If both drink, they will both die. But if only one drinks, that person can reach civilization. One, the son of Keturah, who you've probably never heard of because he's not a significant rabbinic character. and he's not even a rabbi. He's just the son of Keturah. We don't even know who that is. It's better that both should drink and die rather than one should behold their companion's death. But Rabbi Akiva, who you probably have hopefully heard of, who's a very famous and significant rabbi, came and taught. The verse in the Torah is that your fellow may live with you. Your life takes precedence over their life. So the text is very clear. There's obviously a preceding text. If you have enough water for both of you and that person, you must share their water. You cannot say, well, I'm going to keep it all to myself and too bad for you. It's mine. It's mine and I'm not going to share it. You have an obligation to share it. But if you only have enough for yourself, then you are supposed to keep it to yourself, drink it, save yourself, and get to civilization and save yourself. Even if you know there's nothing that, if there's nothing that you can do to save this other person and you only have enough to save yourself, you save yourself. So I don't know if that surprises anybody. Barb, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. That strikes me as a very unrealistic situation. Wouldn't it be more likely that if two people were stranded somewhere, they would not know whether they had enough water to last till the end? So, I mean, that's the real dilemma there. What do you do in a situation like that?
Right. Well, let's say, I mean, can you think of a situation in war or other where you like have the ability to save yourself? And, you know, I mean, I can think of the things that I think of are really gross and macabre and horrible. But I don't know, I just read these things, but this struck me because it was a group of friends and they were all friends from Jewish camp, but they were at a swimming hole and one of the young men started to drown and somebody jumped in to save him and he drowned too.
Mm.
And then another friend jumped in to try to save the both of them and he drowned. Like, I think about it because these were kids that were pretty close probably to my kids' age, Jewish camp, you can picture the whole thing, right? Like, I assume that if you're the parent of boy 2 and boy 3, you get some comfort in thinking that that was the type of child that you raised. It would be pretty horrible to be boy 3 and not jump in and stand there and see what happened to your 2 friends. But Jewish law would say that boy 3 was not obligated. The boy's 3 obligation when he realized that the current was too strong or this was too dangerous or that was to save himself. Now, it's easier, I think what's easier said than done is how you walk away and live with that for the rest of your life. But Jewish law says that if you do not jump into certain death, you must save yourself. So yes, that maybe the water canteen, you don't really know, you can, it's your best guess, but there might be situations where you do make the choice that that you can't save both of you and therefore you have to save yourself. And that's what Jewish law would say that you have to do. But as I said, living with that afterwards, it's maybe not the easiest thing. But that's what Jewish law would say. Now it's interesting because there is that one Ben Petura, right? He's nowhere near the kind of status of a Rabbi Akiva that suggests, no, you do sacrifice yourself. But Jewish law has this concept of pikuach nefesh, right? That you can violate almost anything to save yourself. I'll give you an easier scenario, right? An easier scenario, which isn't another human being, but God forbid the synagogue catches fire, right? And the Torah scrolls catch fire. You do not run back in to save the Torah scrolls, right? You could let Torah scrolls burn. You do not run back in to save Torah scrolls. Nothing is more important than saving your own, than protecting your own life. So you can violate any Jewish law to save your own life. The only things that you can't is kill somebody else to save your life, worship idols, or rape somebody. If somebody says, if you rape this woman or even have or I'll kill you, you're not allowed to do that. But barring those three things, nothing takes precedent over human life, even if you have to abandon somebody else to their death. Paul.
Your story about the Taurus goals reminded me that as a kid, growing up in Buffalo, New York, the Reform congregation, Temple Beth Zion, burned,
Mm,
and one of the firemen ran in and grabbed one of the Taurus and brought it out so it wouldn't burn in the fire.
wow. You know, I shared that video. Nobody ran into to save it, but I shared our first Zoom high holidays when we were looking to make the online services as creative as possible, and we had all of these videos. There was a family, a Jewish family in Florida, whose house burned down. They had a Torah in their house, and the Torah not only didn't get burned in the fire, but it didn't suffer any water damage. So I showed the little video of that, if you remember or don't remember, because at the high holidays we say, you know, who by fire, who by water. And it was just like really hopeful. This poor family that lost everything, but they had their Torah scroll. Listen, I think for some of our families, this might be a hard thing to hear, but you don't run in for a pet either. I know for many people, their pet is like their family, right? But human life takes precedence over the life of a pet. So as terrible and painful as that would be, you don't risk your life for that either. So I guess I would say you have a primary responsibility to protect your own life. And that it takes precedent over almost anything in our tradition. Listen, I don't know, like, this baby formula thing, right? Like right now they're limiting how much you can buy if you can even find it, right? But it's an interesting question. If you walked into a store, which you can't really do today, and there was a shelf full of baby formula, Judaism, I think, would probably say that you would have the right to buy out the store. Now, it's your baby. Now, it's the fear of what it will mean for families to run out. What if there's only one can left and it's your baby? If you share it, there isn't enough for both babies. Like these are, God forbid that it should come to that. God forbid it should come to that. But, this airlift, they were saying that this airlift, they just brought in an airlift from Europe, and it's like 500,000, one bottle for 500,000 babies. So that's nothing, right? That's nothing. So, I mean, there are the God forbid that it should come to that, but these questions of, you're a pediatrician. How do you have samples? How do you determine who gets the samples? These questions are not in the world and in life are real. What if you're a pediatrician that has your own baby? Can you take the samples? How many samples can you take? So it's true that we may not know the water can, and that's probably the part of the difficulty is you might not know exactly how much is in the canteen. Somehow you have to make your best guess. And if you guess wrong, you might both die. So unfortunately, I think that these do become real. My daughter-in-law had some extra formula. The baby's having issues with formula. So they couldn't use that formula. So she's part of a mother's group, and she's like, first come, first serve. I have this case of formula. A woman came, very thrilled, took the case. But within a very short time, people were like, do you have any more? Do you have any more? I need it too. I don't have it. And it was like, she gave it to it didn't occur. Well, like, I'll give you one. I'll give you one. Like these things, unfortunately, we live in such an affluent society that we usually, the people on this call, not everybody in the United States of America, that we don't have to think about what happens when resources are that scarce until we do. So, Ron, your hand is up.
Yep,
And then Judy.
I'm curious, like, 'cause I think this is really fascinating. The discussion is fascinating and the whole concept of discussion, I think, is fascinating. What I'd like to know is, do you know whether or not other faiths have similar rules? Does Christianity or Buddhism or other major faiths
Is that relevant to what this?
have,
But Jerry, we can hear you. I don't know, and that would be fascinating to find out. You know, that would be fascinating to find out. And I don't know the answer to that question.
gotta find ourselves a priest or something?
Right, we need to do some, if anybody wants to do a little research project, it's really fascinating. And I'm trying to think how I don't know. I would think, right? I would think that other religious traditions have guidance about such important issues, but I don't really know. Judy.
What would the law say about a parent sacrificing for a child? I mean, that's something I can't see any parent saying, well, I'm going to save my life rather than my child's, but that goes contrary to what we've been learning.
Right. It's interesting. That's very interesting. You know, I because I'm in a macabre sort of mood, I guess, in the Book of Lamentations, when it talks about all the terrible things that will befall you if you don't follow God's, laws, which is war and siege. And in the Book of Lamentations, it describes women eating their own children, which is seen as the worst horror you could possibly imagine, right? It goes against anything. It's just, what more can you say? Like the worst horror, to be so starving and so desperate that anything that you would think that you would know is maternal instinct, the exact opposite. I don't think that, there's no sense of like you would be punished or you would be faulted if you chose to save your child over yourself. Interestingly enough, we learned when we talk about abortion that until the child is born, the mother's life takes precedence. So that's not the same, of course, as having a living child in front of you. I don't think Judaism was saying that you couldn't, right? That you couldn't sacrifice your life to save your child. Look, for those of us that I left Sophie's Choice, like Dan almost had to carry me out of there. We were like in our 20s. I didn't know what the movie was about. And we went to see it. It was like our dating anniversary. And we were going to see a Meryl Streep movie. And then we were going to go out to dinner. And Dan had to like carry me. I couldn't stop crying. Right. That sense, right. That you would have to choose like which child to save. So I guess that was a long way of saying is that Judaism wouldn't say that you couldn't choose to save your child over you. But it would be interesting to know, and I don't know if there's anything that would specifically counter this teaching or any specific teaching that says, let's talk about a different scenario with, parents and children and then apply it to that. I just think not that I don't even think they talk about it, and maybe because it's just so obvious that like for most people, of course, you would save your child. Where it's not so obvious what to do with this one canteen of water. Anybody else? So, as I said, I do think this, it has an interesting application. This isn't toilet paper. We talk about baby formula. It's not toilet paper that people are, and some people are hoarding it, but what if it's your baby? It's a really, my kids are not hoarding it. They can't even find it. But it's a very frightening issue in our country right now for people that my daughter-in-law is still primarily breastfeeding. So it's not as like, don't get off the call feeling like, I'm scared for the rabbi's grandchild. Like, he's going to be, it's fine. But for these parents who, are not breastfeeding, it's, or children that, are older and can't, drink milk because of allergies. It's pretty horrible. So the Torah and our tradition has some things to say about this. So we will, hopefully this will end soon. We'll see. Anyways, I guess I would end this by saying, it was an interesting Ron's juxtaposition about a lawyer and American law versus I think what Jewish law would say, that not every tradition looks at ethics. They don't always come to the same conclusions about what the most ethical thing is to do. But all of these things have, when we talk about Jewish ethics, they have application in the real world of even today about how we live our lives and how we make our decisions and how hopefully our tradition guides us. But choices have to be made. And I think also what Ron said about, keeping something confidential versus having to be a mandatory reporter, that these all come in, that ethics would be easy if they didn't bump into other ethics, right? Then it would be easy. We would always know the right thing to do. But with ethics, choices have to be, sometimes they're so obvious, right? But what if it's not so obvious about how you deal with your neighbor or your enemy's animal, or how you provide for somebody in need, particularly if it had been somebody who had been affluent before and you want to treat them in a dignified manner. And, one of the things that I hear all the time, and I just love this so much, from our students that deliver Maut Chitim. Anybody ever deliver Maut Chitim for Pesach? So I don't know if they do this with adults, but when the kids come, the person that's receiving the Maut Chitim, the food for Passover or for Rosh Hashanah, very often gives the kids candy bars. And the kids are they're very excited because they like candy bars, but the kids are so surprised, and I think they get something really profound, that these people that are receiving also they don't want to be recipients of charity. They're receiving and they want to also give something, so that it's a mutually, it's a relationship. It's not just about being somebody who gets. And so and I love that. And I've heard every year I hear a student tell me they're so surprised by that. So how we treat people with dignity, how they see themselves, how we want them to feel when we're giving to them, so that they don't feel that they're just taking handouts, how we make ethical decisions. And there's a lot of Jewish ethics and about war and morality around that, but how we make these, how we're guided by these decisions, and it would be very interesting to see what other religious traditions have to say about it. So I don't know if I'll do a research project, but if I find anything out, I'll be sure to let you know. So everyone, do not forget, have a lovely Memorial Day weekend. The holiday of Shavuot is coming up, and we will have services on Sunday morning, June, I don't know, 6th, I think it is, 6 or 7.
5, June 5th.
June 5th. So hopefully some of you will consider joining us. We are back in person on Friday nights, and we are in June going to try it outside at some of them, weather permitting, outside in the courtyard. So for people that feel more comfortable being outdoors, it's always weather permitting. So watch your synagogue emails and watch your weather report. If we ever get summer, we might also, if that works okay and we can Zoom it and the people at home can watch it, because that's been an issue with doing it outside. But if it works smoothly, then we might also be able to consider in the summer some Shabbat morning services outside. So stay tuned and be nimble. All right, everyone. Good night.